Thank you. All right.
Okay. All right. So, I think Dr. Myra has flashed something on screen. I'd like to start with this handout. And if some of you have had the opportunity to access your email, I believe she has sent them to you as well. So if that is more comfortable, you can actually open that via email. But can I just give you probably a minute and 30 seconds to just simply of silence, just to look at these two versions of a paragraph or a few paragraphs from the book of Suresh Kanagaraja. For those of you who don't know him, he is one of the foremost social linguists in my field, and this is actually these two versions actually were versions of an article that he published as he published for the first time internationally in one of the top tier journals in applied linguistics or in our field. So what I wanted to basically show here is to get us to start talking about what got him to revise in a particular way, because the original is part of a paper that was rejected, and based on the review he changed, of course, he revised, he overhauled, and part of that overhaul is this particular section in the introduction. So I'd like us to look at the original and revised first, and then see what has changed, what did he capture in order to get this revision done, submitted, and eventually accepted. So perhaps about a minute and 30 seconds. All right. Can I have probably one or two um, from you? If what are your thoughts on the two versions of this text? Anyone?
Okay,
What do you,
would like me to
yeah?
say
Yes,
something?
please. Yes.
Yeah, I like this one by Suresh. Suresh and I are friends for more than 18 years. We
I'm
worked on
sure.
this accordingly
Excellent. Excellent. Yes.
for a
Excellent.
number of years.
Yeah.
The original one,
Just a personal point, by the way.
okay.
I named my son after Suresh. That's how I could.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah, he's a wonderful scholar by all means.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. The original one is very much personal. It is more aggressive. It is less academic. It is not contextualized in the relevant literature. The second one can convey the same message, but in a more subtle way, and it is quite contextualized in the relevant literature. It is more academic than personal. So this is my initial impression.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you. I'll get back to that. Thanks very much. Anyone else?
Yes, Dr. Tubas.
That's right. Yes.
This is Halima,
Yes.
PhD student.
Hello. Hi. Hello, Halima.
Nice to see you again, Dr. Tobas.
Nice to see you too.
So
Yes.
the first one is, as already said by Dr. Ali, is more about a reflection of a personal experience, while the revised one is based on previous evidences and literature that more convincing and more like heavy in terms of intellectual data.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Yes. I wish we had more time, but I would like to move on to some other stuff. But anyway, a few things to note first here. Um, if you look at the original, the original text is not something that is very rare to find. If you look at other forms and other conventions of writing in other cultures in the world, you will have this kind of writing. So when you talk about, you know, writing, of different kinds or different forms, the original text will feature in a lot of many other contexts, cultural context of writing as well. So we cannot really say this is wrong, except that here, when we are looking at academic writing in a particular context, for example, the expectations of Western oriented writing, then it would have been it was judged or evaluated through that particular lens. Um, the the revision featured quite a number of ways by which an idea is supposed to be packaged. But here we will be going through this in a little while. But if you look at the first part, basically, of the revised version, occasional news reports like the one in a recent issue of Scientific American remind scholars in the Western Hemisphere that their third world colleagues experience exclusion from mainstream scholarly publications, which are overwhelmingly published from North American and Western European locations in the English language. So, we can think of it as, of course, further contextualization, all right? But then what happens now is that when you write um, this particular sentence, the ownership of the idea starts to be taken away from Kanagaraja, all right? Whereas in the original, the I persona comes into the picture. Someone owning this particular idea and thinking about this particular idea, and basically it's mine. Now, what academic writing in this particular form um, starts to take that ownership away because it's supposed to be contextualized. So this is what is this is what is supposed to be the contextualization going on. I see someone, I forgot, I it just went off a little bit, that someone who likes the original. Actually, I also love the original as well, but I'm just trying to make sense of why why the revision actually eventually got him to have this published as well. And so then after that, these discursive reasons for this exclusion could be understood by employing some of the constructs already developed in composition theory and applied linguistics. The discursive reasons for this exclusion could be understood by employing some of the constructs already developed in composition theory and applied linguistics. So then again, it continues the taking away of ownership and locating it within a particular conversation. And that conversation, of course, is in the conversation that supposedly been started by Robert Kaplan, who opened an inquiry into the manner in which the written texts of non-native scholars will display differences. So what you see here is that Kanagaraja has then put forward, his supposed knowledge of the field, because in the original, the discursive contextualization of his idea was that this is mine, all right, but it's not contextualized within a particular conversation. Of course, it becomes problematic here because what conversation are we talking about? Even me from the Philippines, there are conversations going on in academic writing, that preceded Robert Kaplan as well. So it's I understand the discomfort, for example, and the frustration of quite a number of non-Western scholars, for example, when they start talking about or locating their own voices within certain conversations that are acceptable in the academic world, so to speak. Because preceding, Kaplan, for example, at least in the Philippines, there had been a lot of discussion and conversations going on, except that it is these dialogues and these conversations that do not seem to be um, captured or accepted or privileged in that academic writing. So anyway, going back to this revised version, the idea here basically is to put the context, put the idea within a conversation. And what Kanagaraja basically said is, now I know the conversation. I'm telling you. So this is like displaying knowledge of the field, because this is one way for, in a sense, other scholars to basically value or evaluate your own contribution to the field. So then Robert Kaplan, and then moves on to closer to diverse genres of academic writing like Klein, Connor, Eggington, Hines, Moranen, Purves, Wales. So for those of you who are in the field of contrastive rhetoric, these are of course the names. And at this point, there's really no contribution whatsoever from the point of view of the paper. You just need to surface or display knowledge of the field. You have Kaplan, you have Klein, you have Connor. So these are basically, in a sense, performing knowledge of the field. Without these, many scholars would most likely say, there's nothing in this particular paper, which of course is an unfortunate evaluation of the paper. All right. But moving on after that, what is sometimes not well understood is the way the non-discursive conventions of publishing industries. So what happens here is, before the text starts with what is sometimes not well understood is the way the non-discursive conventions of the publishing industry also function, to exclude third world scholars from scholarly journals. Before Kanagaraja basically put that forward, that argument forward, he has already displayed knowledge of the field. So by displaying knowledge of the field, you are, in a sense, displaying your supposed expertise in the area. And then semiotically, you are supposed to then start, arguing for a particular idea in your particular paper. So what happens here, in other words, is that at least in this particular context, putting forth an argument is acceptable once you are able to display your own understanding of the conversations in the field. And to put it probably in a more concrete way, it's like you are in at a table, you are at a table, you are in a conversation with people within your field, within your area of expertise, right? You cannot just simply come in and say, you know what, I'm new here, listen to me. I guess the idea being that before you even join the conversation at the table, you have to introduce yourselves, and in a sense, you have to share. You have to let them know that you know what you're talking about, what everyone is talking about, and basically say, you know what, I know you, I know you, I know you, I know you, but I also have something to contribute. So if you don't have the I know you, I know you, I know you, I know you, it's very difficult for this conversation, for this table to pull in another chair for you, so that people will start listening to you as well. Okay, so I mean, I'm starting I'm starting this kind of an introduction to this, because what I'd like then to do is to start to continue with the another set of handouts, and see how that becomes all of these is captured in abstracts. All right. Now, typically, of course, we would think of abstracts as a capture of the paper, right? Dr. Mara, can you start with the second handout, please? But my point here is not to really just show the simply the abstract as an abstract by itself, but an abstract as articulating and producing and generating academic writing as a social practice. To give you, in a sense, a more visual representation of what exactly that means, academically. So let me start with the first abstract here and get us through, some of these features. So we are thinking of, I'm thinking, or we should be thinking of this as not just simply an abstract, but a representation of how academic writing envisions itself to be. So this is basically an abstract given in a presentation, conference presentation. Someone, of course, Professor Anson, someone who is in writing and technology as well. So I'll read this and let us try to unpack, follow the thinking that goes on in this abstract, and perhaps, hopefully you can help me out with this too. Composition scholars have long argued that nothing contributes more strongly to students' development as writers than carefully considered response to their work. For several decades, researchers have studied teacher response from multiple perspectives, including the style, focus, quantity, and interpersonal nature of marginal and end comments. However, emerging technologies now offer options for response, including audiovisual commentary provided through screen captures. At present, we know little about how such a shift in modality affects the nature of response, nor how students react to and use it as learners. This paper will, one, briefly explain and demonstrate the use of screen capture technology to respond to and evaluate students' writing. Two, share the results of our ongoing studies, investigating students' and teachers' impressions and perceived effectiveness of this mode of response. And three, describe some preliminary findings of a new study involving this use of screen capture for students' peer review of drafts in progress. Now let us unpack, the thinking and what is happening here, first and foremost. In this, Professor Chris Hansen begins, of course, with composition scholars have long argued that nothing contributes more strongly to students' development as writers than carefully consider response to their work. So recall Kanagaraja's work as well, when he begins with a contextualization of an idea, right? So this is more like taking away ownership over your own idea, because this has been, discussed in this particular area of work or research as well. So for several decades, researchers have studied teacher response from multiple perspectives. So it's the same sort of displaying of knowledge that is involved in, this kind of writing. And I say that this should not be treated simply as, abstract writing, but something that is reflective of the kind of thinking that is happening, or that should be happening when we're thinking academically, quote unquote, of course, precisely because I think this is how we attempt or aim to begin thinking about ideas, begin to think about arguments in our own work and research. But what is interesting here, of course, is the second paragraph, which I think is missing in a lot of work, and which I think is missing in a lot of, let's say, journal submissions, for example. This very strategic use of however, right? However, emerging technologies now offer new options for response. Now, I kid my students, and actually myself. It has been really very, very effective for myself as well. Every time I think about an idea or a research project or a research opportunity, I always ask myself, so what is my however? Because if I don't have a however, then the potential theoretical contribution or even the methodological contribution will not be very, very clear. And I say that also from the perspective of as an associate editor, because of this, so many contributions that you usually get from that you usually get in, let's say, from different parts of the world, to the International Journal of Sociology of Language. And the reality is, the practical reality is that you have a variety of so many abstracts coming in and so many manuscripts coming in. And the very first thing that we usually do is to look for that, however, all right? You go for it, and where's that, however, all right? Because it's not that you invalidate the others, the other work that doesn't have a however, but the moment it's not clear, then it is almost sure that the paper will have a very, very unclear position in terms of its contribution to the field, for example. So we go through that. If it's not in the abstract, we go through the introduction, for example, and say, where's the however? Because we want to know whether this paper can put forward, a theoretical contribution, or I think a theoretical engagement in the area, because that, however, is very important. So it doesn't have to be the word however, but rhetorically, the however is very, very important. And that also, again, brings us back to Kanagaraja. It wasn't really however that he mentioned, but then that rhetorical follow up from displaying knowledge was there, which is like, basically saying, however, nothing much has been done about, nothing much has been done in terms of the contributions of non-Western scholars, for example, to this whole idea of non-discursive requirements in academic writing. So even if he did not use the word however, the rhetorical need for a however is almost there. Of course, however, here it doesn't need to be theoretical. That's the most important thing. But we know that it's almost always ambitious to always talk about the however in a theoretical sense. But however can also be in a methodological sense. Much has been done in this area. So much has been done in this area. But very little ethnographic work, for example, has been conducted. A lot of it has in the context of these certain sets of methods, but however, nothing much in terms of putting together these methods and let's say bring in some ethnographic perspectives, for example. A little bit less effective, but still, however, would then be, for example, the subtopics within this particular area. So, for example, much has been written about this, but very little has been done in non-Western context, for example. So that still is a however. Or much has been done on this, the use of non-standard varieties of English, for example, but very little work has been done in the primary level. A lot of it is in the secondary, a lot of it in the college level as well. So, but still, there's a however. And if a reviewer or someone who is reading up your work would then try to size up or evaluate your work according to that. So if the however is just enough for that person, then it would be acceptable. But the point really here is in terms of academic writing as social practice, the however usually comes into the picture. It's basically helps you push your idea forward, by asking yourself all the time, where is my however, so what's my however, and so on. We'll get to that even more a little bit later. And of course, after saying what is your however, then you will now then start talking about what will you do. All right, so this is the however, but then what will you do? So this paper will briefly explain, then we share results, and then describe some preliminary findings of a new study. Okay, let me go to the next one. Though this doesn't have the word however, this is a paper of ours by with Myra, Dr. Myra. All right, this is a paper that we published also just a few years ago. This is the discursive compartmentalization in a critical multilingual multicultural classrooms. Let me read this. What happens when critical discourses are introduced in the classroom? How do students make sense of these discourses in the light of their experiences as teachers? what is the role of the state and its ideologies in shaping the way critical discourses are apprehended in the classroom. The paper aims to map out the discursive reconfigurations of one particular classroom in Singapore, where in-service teachers are introduced to critical multicultural discourses. Our data have shown that the teachers compartmentalize two sets of discourses in order to make critical discourses more acceptable to them. On the one hand, they affirm and endorse critical multicultural discourses in the classroom. On the other hand, they go back to state-defined discourses, which radically limit multiculturalism to official conceptualization and deployment of race-based pedagogy. So here, so far, it basically shows what we have done, all right, what we found out, right? But in terms of our contribution, in terms of your however, it still is not there, all right? And so we need to display knowledge too, right? But here again, you see the abstract is written in a slightly different way, but the thinking and the practicing of academic writing remains basically the same. In the next sentence, a typical approach to investigating contending discourses is how one overpowers the other, or how they mesh together to form another distinct discourse, but decentering these assumptions from our work and instead letting a unique discursive configuration to emerge from the teacher's voices themselves. So a typical approach, in other words, what's happening in the literature is that when you look at different discourses in the classroom, the view is always to look at which discourse overpowers the other, all right? Or whether this discourse or that discourse, they come together, they mesh together to form another distinct discourse. So in a sense, in a few words, we were able to display our understanding of the work in this particular area of, discourses in the classroom. What happens if you have different discourses? What do people do? So what usually people do is to look at which discourse is more dominant than another, and another is whether these discourses come together to produce another discourse. So that's pretty much what the area is about when you talk about studying contending discourses in the classroom. But what we have done is to decenter these assumptions and letting a unique discursive configuration to emerge from the teachers' voices themselves, which have generated a rather interesting view of what these teachers do with such contending discourses. They compartmentalize them. So what we have put forward, in other words, is this whole idea of teachers, or the whole idea of studying these discourses, not one over the other, overpowering the other, or how they mesh together, but how these discourses actually get compartmentalized, right? What do they do? So teachers do this and think about this, but in another layer of work in their practice, they also do this. So the discourses remain there. They are not, one is more important than the other, but they just compartmentalize it. They know when to talk about this discourse. They know when to practice this other discourse. I guess the point here really is, that the however comes within, or is embedded within, this whole idea of what is our contribution to this whole idea of analyzing discourses or competing discourses in the classroom. As you can see, it's slightly different from the earlier point, the earlier abstract, but the thinking and the practice of academic writing remains the same. It's always a question of, let me display then my knowledge, understanding of the field, and then I will share with you what the however is. Now, this whole idea doesn't appear in the abstract, so I don't want to give that impression, because my point here is that whether it is an abstract, whether it is a journal article, whether it is actually an MA dissertation or a PhD thesis, you can collapse all of that to this kind of thinking and this kind of practice. It's always about displaying your knowledge of the field and then sharing with everyone else what is your however, and articulating and expanding that however in whatever form. So whether it is just a short piece of academic article or a PhD thesis, like a 300-page PhD thesis, the thinking remains the same. The practice of academic writing remains the same. Now, let me, okay, can we continue to the next abstract, Dr. Myra? All right, so this is an article of mine, all right, and of course published some time ago. This is about the unequal production of knowledge in the social linguistics of Englishes. So I'd like us to go through the same sort of thinking about this issue and thinking about this kind of thinking as well. So the many issues surrounding the social linguistics of English have resulted in the burgeoning of scholarly investigations into constraints and possibilities of world Englishes, English as a lingua franca, and English as an international language in classrooms around the world. So pretty much, again, the displaying of knowledge. These are the issues surrounding this work in the field. However, okay, so this is now my however, what is much less studied is the place of Englishes as an academic pedagogical issue among the many problems teachers face every day. Right, so that's the however. Right, less studied is the place of Englishes as an academic pedagogical issue among the many problems teachers face every day. So then what do I do? In this paper, I will argue that Englishes as a pedagogical problem is partly a construction or creation of such investigations, and in many ways is disconnected from the daily challenges of English language teachers. First, I will provide a brief introduction to the key issues in world Englishes. Second, I will present data showing that teachers actually do not see these issues as crucial to their own practice. This paper draws on a 3-year localization project in ELT curriculum development in several institutions in Singapore, Indonesia, and the Philippines and Vietnam. In particular, it tracks the stories of 3 teachers in each of the last 3 countries to give substance to the paper's argument that the current line of inquiry in the pedagogical implications of the social linguistics of English is unequal and usually treats the teacher in the classroom as a recipient, not as a co-constructor of knowledge in the field. Let me parse this abstract. Can you go to the next page, please? So, yes, thanks, Dr. Myra. All right, so how does it work now? So what is the current state of knowledge in the field? The many issues surrounding the social linguistics of English have resulted in the burgeoning of scholarly investigations into constraints and possibilities of world Englishes, English as a lingua franca, and English as an international language in classrooms around the world. So where's the gap in the knowledge? However, what is much less studied is the place of Englishes as an academic pedagogical issue among the myriad of problems teachers face today. So what do you propose to argue to fill in the gap? So in this paper, I will argue that Englishes as a pedagogical problem is partly a construction or creation of such investigations, and in many ways is disconnected from the daily challenges of English language teachers. So how will you present your argument? Well, first, I will provide a brief introduction to the key issues in world Englishes. Second, I will present data showing that teachers actually do not see these issues as crucial to their own practice. What data are you using? Or how will your data be gathered? So this paper draws on a 3-year localization project in ELT curriculum development in several institutions in Singapore, Indonesia, the Philippines, and Vietnam. And in particular, it tracks the stories of 3 teachers in each of the last 3 countries to give substance to the papers. Now, the next one is, of course, usually not a compulsory step, but may be taken off this thing. Now, I think what I'm trying to point out here really is that there are questions that we respond to, and many of these questions typically we are not really aware, but we are responding to these questions because these are the demands of academic writing, right? And so when we are thinking of a new research topic, for example, I think I'm not alone in experiencing this. So sometimes from the office to the house to our homes, we have this really brilliant idea, thinking about this new idea, new research line or research topic, and thinking about this idea, when you try to unpack it, we unpack it by responding to these questions. Say what's happening in the field, what's going on in the field, and what is the gap that this particular area, this particular topic that I am trying to figure out, to research on, basically fills in. And in the end, you start to then thinking about, so how do I propose to argue here? You know, how do I gather data? So what could be my methodology, and so on and so forth. So it keeps on coming back, in this particular way, precisely because the kinds of expectations of academic writing, of you, as an academic writer, are the kinds of expectations that you respond to. So your thinking processes, your social processes, all work towards addressing or responding to these unwritten questions, basically, whether we are thinking of a journal article, or we're thinking of an MA dissertation or a PhD thesis. All right, so can you put up, Dr. Myra, the slides, please? But while she does that, perhaps I can open the floor first for a few questions, if you have questions or clarification or thoughts. What do you think? Do you have your however in evaluating your contribution to your own area? Do you have your however?
Hi, Dr. Topaz. This is Fajr, if I may speak.
Hello.
For a
Yeah.
second.
Hello.
Hi, it's good to see you again. I was just reflecting on what you said about reclaiming ownership of your own ideas. And I think the however really helps researchers reclaim ownership of their own ideas in their
That's right.
abstracts and their research as a whole. So I just
That's
wanted
right.
to share that to the world.
Yes, brilliant, actually. And that is, I think, why the however is very critical and crucial. Of course, not all journals, not all expectations will always go for that, however. But usually, the more competitive, at least my experiences, the more competitive the journals are in my area, it is the however that is usually the most important, because that is where you will be judged in terms of your contribution to the field. But I understand that it is very difficult to get to the however, because it has got something to do with self-assurance as well, being self-assured and being self-confident. Because however is, as what you said, is reclaiming knowledge and possessing it as your own. And if you don't have that kind of confidence within the field, then it becomes very, very difficult as well. All right. But yes, you're right. However, is a reclaiming your own position and your own understanding of the field, basically, and your contribution. Okay. Yes. Let's move on. Yes. So anyway, so I'm trying to capture now what I've just said, just contributed, shared with you, in terms of some of these, um, lenses. So when you talk about, in other words, academic writing, whatever it is, however you write it in the abstract, or however you produce it or you generate in a PhD thesis, there are basically three key things, aspects of academic writing. One is disciplinarity, right? Disciplinarity meaning that you need to display your ability of demonstrating basically your broad knowledge of the field. So that's disciplinarity in a sense of knowing where you are in this particular conversation. And the other one is criticality, right? In other words, you can't just simply display knowledge and telling people that you know everything. Of course, you can't everything about the field. Criticality is very, very important, because this is where you showcase your ability to present the weaknesses or the loopholes in the current state of research in the field. And the last one is positionality. Is really now the ability to locate a new research space for your work. So how do you now position yourselves? How do you go about doing it? So this is your weakness, but at the same time, how do you study it? How are you going to do your research? So three things, three broad things that basically we all engage in. And I would probably, you can always come back to me to this, but at least within the areas that I'm familiar with, these aspects, you mix them up in so many ways, in so many genres, but these aspects usually are present. Your disciplinarity, the criticality, and the positionality of anyone's work, basically. Next, please. So in terms of academic writing as social action, so this is how we can actually think about these three aspects. When you talk about disciplinarity, disciplinarity is aiming to join a conversation, right? You're aiming to join a conversation, and I think that's what I meant earlier when I said that at the table of scholars in your area, you cannot just pull in a chair. At least in the context of academic writing, you can just pull in a chair and say, hey, you know what, listen to me, right? Disciplinarity is important in the sense that you need to come in here and say, hey, you know I know you, I know what you work, you've been working on this, you've been working on this, you've been working on this. And by showcasing that disciplinarity in the table, at the table, basically, there's the hope that there's that hope and wish to join that conversation. And hopefully you can be invited in, or you can come in, I don't know, but you can then start erupting the conversation. But the interrupting of the conversation must be preceded by this kind of disciplinarity that is somehow required. And of course, then becoming a part of the conversation is your positionality. Then when you become part of the conversation is then you now know, people now know basically where your contribution is in this particular conversation at the table. So think of, let's say, academic writing as social action in terms of conversations, in terms of aiming to be part of a conversation and aiming to interrupt the conversation, but at the same time also becoming a part of that conversation as well. Okay, so it is here where you actually think of academic writing as acts of persuasion. I always tell my students, and even myself too, that even a review of related literature is not just a simple description or putting together of knowledge in the field. It is an act of persuasion, because you are in a sense persuading people, your reader, that hey, I know this field, and this is where the problems are. This is where these are where the lapses are, and it is a way. It is a way to converse, and engage people in that particular conversation. Okay, next. So what are these key moves that I have just simply described? It's again establishing a research territory. All right. So if you go back to Kanagaraja's earlier revision, basically he located his work, this like grand, brilliant idea within a conversation in contrastive rhetoric, for example. The idea being that there is a need to establish a research territory, right? And then you establishing a niche. So move to basically establishing a niche, establishing a space. You need to put together, you need to locate yourself within a particular niche and then occupy it. Like it's like claim ownership to it as well. Okay, next please. All right, so more visual representation here of what exactly I mean by all of that now. So when we start establishing a territory, the disciplinarity, in other words, that I just mentioned earlier. So this is where you actually talk about aiming to join a conversation. All right, next please. So establishing a niche, establishing a space. This is where your however is, so however is where you interrupt the conversation. All right. But I guess my point here is you just do not interrupt anytime. You interrupt in a way that is, appropriate within a particular academic convention. I am not saying this is how I do things at the moment. I think that there are certain. I mean, we've changed positions along the way. I think because probably of your role and your status in the field, you are able to interrupt the conversation without necessarily being always polite, in other words. But I'm not saying that we should not be polite all the time. But what I'm saying is interrupting the conversation requires some kind of strategizing, and that is, showcasing disciplinarity and then bringing in your criticality as well. Then move 3, then you occupy the niche. That's your positionality, all right? Becoming a part of that conversation, locating yourself in that conversation, so that people will now start by saying, oh, okay, so she's done that, but she's done that in the context of, ethnography. Oh, he's done the same topic, but I think his expertise is the Philippines, all right? Or, oh, it's the same topic, but she's just done more of a higher education. I've done more of the primary education. So that kind of conversation is where positionality comes into the picture. Next, please. And this is my last slide, and then I'll continue with questions from all of you. All right, so just think of this as a way to capture everything that I wanted to do or to say in 1 hour. All right. So when you talk about elements of academic writing, we talk about disciplinarity, we talk about criticality and positionality, and whatever it is that we do. Again, it's what I said. You are not talking about the abstract alone, but even the whole paper that we write for a journal. It's these elements keep on coming back, or should be there embedded in whatever genre that we actually produce in academic writing. Our disciplinarity of the paper, the criticality, and the positionality. And so when you talk about these elements in terms of moves, something, we're doing something, in other words, we're talking of it in terms of establishing a research territory. So disciplinarity is, a move that you establish your own research territory. I'm doing it here and not over there. Sometimes, things are very, very familiar, all right? And the topic is very, very familiar, but somehow the research territory is different. So, you talk about the politics of English, I talk about the politics of language, but it's slightly different when it's someone from political science or sociology discusses it, or someone from social linguistics discusses it, or someone from another field like language policy discusses it. Because while it's the same sort of topic, the conversation somehow change because of the lines of citations that you're using, and the kinds of conversations and voices that you try to bring in. All right, but whatever it is, it's always, the question is, where do you locate it in? So a very recent example is with my MA student, for example, when she talked about the decisions of UK students, some of our students, professional decisions whether to go back to China or to stay in the UK, and what is the part basically of what is the role of language ideologies, like standard or non-standard understandings of language in their perspective, in their decisions whether they want to stay as teachers in the UK or go back to China. Right. So it's I think to me it's a really fascinating topic. But my key question is, how do you locate your research? It is in the context of the internationalization of education research, or is it in the context of social linguistics research, for example? Not that one is better than the other, but I think you need to first and foremost know where to establish your research territory. Well, what you did, of course, was to try to bring in both sets of areas of research and bring them together. It's fine, for as long as, again, the disciplinarity is clear. Then, of course, then you're establishing a niche. All right. So again, it's always the question is then, so what is your however? You see, when we're halfway through our semester and students start coming in with their own paper, all right, their own paper, and this is what I want to do, this is my topic, this is my plan, this is what I want to do, and so on. It keeps on coming back. This is what I want to do, these are the data, and so on. But I always go back to the question, so what is your however? And that's when they get stunned, basically. No, not that you expect a lot in terms of theoretical contributions, but I think getting the students to think about not just simply producing knowledge, but engaging knowledge in the field. I think that's very important, because that's where I think we can get the students to think of it, get ourselves to think as well, not just our students, to get ourselves to think about our own contributions to the field, not only in terms of theoretical contributions, but thinking about how to engage the field, not just how to produce and reproduce the field. And I think that's the critical role of criticality, where we really need to have, we really need to push the thinking beyond just simply, this is what I want to do, this is what I want to study, but push it a little bit more and say, so what is now my however? Okay. And of course, positionality is an academic move, which is occupying the research. So this is what I'm going to do. These are the research methods that I'm going to do. These are the people who I'm going to investigate. This is the community that I'm going to examine, and so on and so forth. So you're occupying that niche. So I'm doing this now. I'm claiming it, all right, because this is me. This is my work. Now, all of that, if you think of academic writing as social action or social practice, so it's, again, it's going through all of these terms, disciplinarity as, aiming to join a conversation, criticality as basically interrupting the conversation, and positionality as becoming a part of the conversation. So, yeah, so if before I ask, to ask questions, all right, I think the important point to remember here again is, like, I started with abstracts because I wanted us to think about abstracts not just simply as mere abstracts that should be written at the end of our work, but abstracts are a way to figure out whether we know where we're going in terms of our own research. I write abstracts of my work as well, because the moment I write it down, and if I cannot do, for example, even the first move, then that means I don't know yet the area that I'm working in. And if I don't have a however, then perhaps I haven't read enough, all right, in this particular area, or perhaps I haven't looked at the data yet in much more detail. That's why I still don't know what the potential contributions are. So writing down the abstract, getting myself to write the abstract of a paper that I'm writing or that I'm doing, helps me clarify which part in my writing, in my research, is still lacking. Do I still lack the disciplinarity, for example? I still don't know much about the conversations going on, or I really don't know what my however is, and so on and so forth. So here, it's not so much about just the writing of the abstract, but how we practice academic writing, that actually is reflective of what we do in the abstract, what we do in the introduction, and what we do in the entire research paper as well. Okay, all right. So, sorry, I was a little bit fast, I think, than usual, but I hope I get certain points across. And if you have questions, please do ask. Thank
So
you.
I can now stop my sharing, right? Thank you so much, Dr. Tupas. So just a very quick round of applause.
Thank you.
A single clap from me. Let me stop the sharing now. So just to provide some feedback and some comments as well on Dr. Tupas' presentation. I think the one great thing that Dr. Tupas has taught me as an academic, having worked with him for the past several years now in Singapore and now here in the UAE, is that he has taught me intellectual courage and academic positionality. My background as a clinician, as a clinical psychologist, has always taught me to be very objective. And by being objective, I think the main positionality is neutral. So there is really, so it's still a position, like you said.
Yes.
It's neither one nor the other, but it has taught me to become a little timid when it comes to really articulating what is it that I want to say in the research. And my collaboration with Dr. Tupas has really provided me with that courage and that strength to just articulate that position very well. So that being said, questions, thoughts, comments? I did
thoughts, not necessarily questions, but thoughts and everything.
Yeah.
I would be happy to hear them. Yeah.
Anyone?
Yes, doctor.
Yes, please go ahead.
Yes, my name is Maha. I'm a PhD student, and my domain is in language and literacy. I just wanted to comment on the idea of disciplinarity and the criticality and the positionality. It reminds me with the idea of Bourdieu about habitus, because the notion of habitus is the collection of skills, beliefs, and attitudes that entitle one to act the way he or she does. So when Bourdieu proposed the idea of habitus, he proposed that each individual enforces certain perceptions and disposition, previously established concepts in social occasions. And whenever these social dispositions are created, so it comes, or they are coming into play in social context and interaction. So this is the idea of the research. The research means that you have to engage with different conversations and different communicative events in which individuals can interact and they can set their own dispositions later on.
Mhm, mhm. Well, thank you very much. Yes. Well, we can. My PhD is on Bordeaux, so we can talk about more that probably offline. But I guess when we talk about dispositions, I am in a sense very uncomfortable actually sharing something about academic writing and social practice without necessarily interrogating what I just said for the past 1 hour, because here what is happening is we are introducing ourselves into a certain set of social practices, which we can talk about dispositions, but these dispositions are not necessarily healthy to a lot of people, because these dispositions are in a sense hegemonic as well. So when I talk about disciplinarity, I have to also constantly remind ourselves, and myself too, that when we talk about disciplinarity, it's always a question of if this is knowing the field, why am I supposed to know this field? Because disciplinarity has also excluded many other voices in that have come before these fields supposedly. And I keep on saying and explaining this to actually Dr. Mara and all people who cared to listen to me, that my even work in disciplinarity in social linguistics, which is supposed to start from the 1960s, is so much later than what let's say even our own scholars back in the Philippines have been writing for a century. So if you look at the novels of Jose Rizal, the national hero, it produced in the late 1800s, for example, the novels already were talking a lot about ethnographic work in language teaching, about communicative language teaching, for example. These are ideas that were there far before, but they were excluded just because we needed, to form our own idea of disciplinarity. But this is a different conversation. But I just would like to keep ourselves to remind ourselves that disciplinarity is not something that is correct just because we position ourselves in this particular discipline. It's a way of including and excluding voices as well. So we need to bear that in mind. But thanks for going back to Bordeaux on that.
Okay, so we have like 8 minutes left. Any other thoughts, comments?
Course, Dr. Mera and Dr. Tobas. I was 100% fascinated of the way that you have articulated the however. Now, when you start, talking about it, really, my heart beats were faster, and I really like you did this cognitive shift of my way of thinking of this basic English word that I have always known as a normal, contrasting phrase or a word. So now what I understood from this specific, however, Dr. Tobas, is that when you would like to address certain challenges of previous literature that you would like to address, or deficiencies, or weaknesses of previous literature, or when you would like to experiment a new and discovered concept of a research. Is that what you meant by the
No,
how?
it's both. Yes, it's both. Basically both. Yeah.
Well, I got it well.
Um, yes, that's right. Yeah, it's actually both. I mean, however is broad, basically. However is in thinking about, because you see, typically we would say, oh, this is what I want to do. This is what I want to do. This is the topic that I wanted to do. But changing it a little bit more by saying, so then, however, where's that? What is your however? So then it could be so many different ways. Again, as what I said, it could be theoretical. it could be methodological, all right? It could be geographical as well. Like, it's always, we cannot discount the fact that your however is like so much, but even my field, so much has been done on, let's say, the work on native speakerism, for example, but very much less in the context of certain countries or certain geographical locations too. So that can also be your however. Even in internationalization of education, for example, there are questions about, the much of it has got something to do with higher education, for example. But what about in the primary level? Is there also internationalization in the primary level? So very much less research in that area. So that's also your however. I think it's, I don't want to limit it to a certain kind of however, but I guess the however is more like a rhetorical move in a sense in the way we think about our own research. Because I guess to me, as what was mentioned earlier, that's our way of reclaiming knowledge. Producing knowledge by itself is already somehow produces some hegemonic discourses, but your however can hopefully, change it a little bit more so that you can come in and bring in your own, your own contribution. So that's reclaiming it. So I think to me is very important. It's the most difficult, but I think we all need to work towards that.
All right. So last 5 minutes, perhaps we could invite some of our faculty members to share some of their thoughts, their insights about.
Yeah, hi, Dr. Tupas. This is Mona Janahi. Thank you, Dr. Moira. I just have a question with regards to publication. How do you convince publishers and journals that your however is valid? I mean, we talk about geographic regions or contextual. Like, yes, this research has been done before in North America, for instance, but it did not look at the Arab culture or the United Arab Emirates or certain ethnicities. So how do you convince those journals that my research is valid and my however is valid as well?
Well, I'm not sure what you mean by however as valid, really. That's why I think sometime in my academic, in my sharing, I said that at the end of the day, academic writing is persuasion. At the end of the day, your abstract writing is persuasion. At the end of the day, your literature review is persuasion. You think of the whole thing as a kind of persuasion. And I cannot, of course, anticipate exactly who is going to be reading it. But what I can assure you is that they will be looking for you, however. All right. So if you are able to establish the kind of disciplinarity, in other words, being able to showcase, for example, your understanding of the field that you would like to be, you're aiming a conversation in, that's already one, half of your problem solved. But the other problem, of course, is, what is your however? And sometimes, of course, it's also a question of, what is it that you are, what is that, however, based on? And that's the reason why also your positionality comes to the picture. There's one recent, I won't mention it in a lot of detail, but there's one book proposal that I just I rejected, for example, because there was a however, but it's based on what, like let's say 5 or 10 respondents, for example, supposedly unpacking and so on. So positionality is also really very, very important in the sense that you cannot just simply have a however without showcasing how you would like to go about doing it, for example. Because in my case, you need to also basically put forward a clear understanding of what your methods are and why these methods are also very important.
Yes.
All right, and why these methods are the best or the most appropriate methods for your however. All right, so all of these three, I think, must come together. I think it's very difficult to say, to anticipate exactly what they will say, but I think it's within your means. You think about your disciplinarity, your criticality, and your positionality all the time, how these come together. And I think that's one way to assist, ensure that your writing is persuasive.
Yes. Thank you so much, Dr. Tupas.
Thank you.
Anyone
Dr.
else?
Moira, may I add something?
Yes, please, Dr. Ali, go ahead. Yes, please.
Thank you. Yeah, I'd like to add 1 or 2 points to what Dr. Tupas said, and again, responding to Dr. Mona. Yeah. Now, the however could be anything. It could be a new angle, a new variable. It could be a new aspect,
Yeah.
a new issue. So it could be anything. And the point is that if you have a belief, a strong belief that this is really valid, and you can convey this belief to the reader, to the evaluators, to the journal editor, and to the reviewers, then that is a great. So whether it is in an EFL context or international or any variable, you have a belief in the validity of the variable, and you are able to convey that belief to the reader, to the people, to the, if you like, to the gate checkers. If you are able to do that, then your however is a great. So it could be anything, but it should be of interest to the current scholarship of researchers. They should say, oh, this is out of date. No one is interested in the area. It is an interesting area and would like to know more about it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Ali. One practice that I usually, I did a bit of ethnographic work some time ago among reviewers themselves, and one thing that I realized, it's one thing that I found out, and is that when reviewers start reviewing their papers, they don't start reading from the start. They go to the references, right? They go to the references and see who gets quoted or not. I guess, of course, now I have a much broader understanding of why the references need not necessarily be these references, but that's the practice that people usually do, engage in. They start with the references because the references tell a story.
So we have now run over time. Yep. Yes, Dr. Hassan, please go ahead.
Just a final word. Thank you very much for these interesting meanings and interesting concepts. I think this talk is really relevant to our PhD and master student, because at this point in time, we have noticed that some of the difficulties they have in formulating their own problems and in generating some kind of scholarly work, knowledge from the literature review. At the moment, we are having that kind of problem. But I found the three concepts are really fascinating because they reflect collectively the outcomes of chapter 3 or chapter 2 rather, literature review, and chapter 1. I'm not concerned about the publication at this point in time. I'm thinking the great number of this audience here are PhD and master students, so they need to relate this functionality, disciplinarity, and criticality to their own work. So I think greater understanding of these three concepts would rather give what I call identity for research and identity for the student himself. So what do you think in this case where the students are really struggling to apply these three concepts? So what's the best way to apply them? I see the literature review apply these three concepts together. So the outcomes of the literature review should be some kind of disciplinarity and some kind of criticality and also positionality, because you will identify yourself. So to me, these three concepts will create an identity for research, an identity for the author himself or herself. Thank you very much for introducing this.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Okay. So maybe just to respond to Dr. Hassan's comment as well, I think the question is, how do we encourage our PhD students to reach that level of positionality, criticality, and so forth? I think the key word here would be to read. To read and read and read more and really immerse yourself in the literature. You cannot join a conversation that you're not aware of to begin with. I think that having that knowledge of the parameters, the boundaries of your discipline would also allow you some insight in terms of how you could position yourself in that space.
And having said that, Dr. Myra, I think we have some sessions next week, right? So I'd like to now see a revision of these abstracts, because I look at those abstracts. I would like the however to be featured, to be surfaced now, if it is possible, and see how these things work.
Yeah. So I'm happy that Dr. Shashidar and Dr. Mona are here. Dr. Rachel was here earlier as well, but the other three, I believe, who submitted an abstract are not with us, but we will be able to provide them the recording anyway. So I will definitely let them
Yeah,
know.
okay. Yeah, the recording. Yeah.
Okay, so thank you so much again. We have run over time, but we thank you for your patience and for your commitment to really learn more about research literacy. And I hope that this conversation about academic writing and abstract writing served to drive the point that an abstract is more than just a summary of your research.
Excellent.
Right?
Yes.
I think for most of our, even academics, I believe, they think of an abstract just as a summary of what they've done. But it has to go beyond that. It has to be more than that. We have to extend the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so thank you, everyone. And
thank you very much. And I'll still be seeing many of you in the next few weeks.
Okay,
bye bye. Thank you. Thank you.
So much.
Thank you.
everyone.